Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Mike Simonsen, founder and president of Altos Research, to talk about what the data says about home buyers, inventory, and home prices. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Always great to be here, Sarah.
Love having you on. You are the data guy. You are the source of so much of what we talk about on this podcast, what we are reporting on, because we have that super fresh, almost real-time data from Altos on all sorts of things on the housing market. So love having you on, get to pick your brain. Some of the questions I want to start out with today aren't actually from the Altos database, from that data, but from the FHFA database, which they come out quarterly talking about the what's going on with mortgages. So would love to dig into that a little bit, because you've definitely been looking at that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of really neat conclusions that we can understand about what the American mortgage holder looks like right now. Like, how good or bad are they in shape? So we know obviously mortgage rates have been climbing for 2 years now, more than 2 years now, and so before that, everybody had a 3% mortgage. And in fact, the question is like, how much is that changing? And when people have more expensive mortgages, does that therefore lead to some other change in the housing market? Like if we have more expensive mortgages, are people more likely to default, and are the foreclosures likely to increase? And those kind of things. So there's a couple of really sort of important conclusions that you can draw from the latest analysis of all the mortgages that we have in the U.S. And I think the big one is to understand that we have still 57% of mortgage holders in the U.S. have a mortgage under 4%. So wow. 57% of the country. And there's another 18% under 5% mortgage rate. So whatever that number is, 75% of the country has really ultra cheap mortgages. Now that's decreasing each month as some of the cheaper ones get paid off. You move or you finish paying the loan, and 400,000 new homes a month get purchased. And some of those, and they're getting financed at current rates, which are 7 or something in that range. And so each month, a few more expensive mortgages come into the market. We have about in terms of an expensive, meaning over 5% in this case, 5 or over 6%. And that's, back to 2020 levels with those numbers of folks. There's still vastly more folks with mortgages under 4%. And the cheaper the mortgage you have, the less likely you are to pay it off. So those stick around longer. I think what it shows is that American mortgage holders realize what a great deal they have, and they are absolutely leaning into it. Like that is those payments are dramatically low. And so that's one of the things that's been, keeping the economy buoyed over the last few years.
Absolutely. Because, with the inflation on other things, if you locked in a really good rate there, you've got that fixed debt cost. And okay, so your groceries are more, your gas is more, whatever these other things are going up. But that part is really stable. Also, like you said, it's going to stick around. Why would the cost of that money is so low. You don't have incentive to do a lot with it. Like, just leave it alone.
That's right. If you have some cash, you can go put it in your bank account and make 5%, or you could pay off your mortgage, but you're only paying 3% on your mortgage. It's better to keep the cash. And right. So it makes you more money to keep the cash. And so it is that's exactly what's happening. And, it's a fascinating stimulus to the economy, which is, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, suddenly my mortgage payments dropped by $1,000 a month. And now I have $1,000 extra bucks a month. Yeah, for a lot of Americans.
That's for a lot of Americans. So, what do you see on the debt to income ratio, right? So, obviously, as it's more expensive, we've got home prices that have gone up. You're paying more for mortgages. For people who have, who have gotten a mortgage in the last year, what does that look like?
Well, so there's got the mortgage in the last year, which is rates are up. And so the debt to income ratio for new mortgages is actually at record highs. It's like 40%. And so debt to income is your gross income and your mortgage payment. And like that's a big deal for new buyers. The last time it was this high was 2006, right? The bubble. I think a notable difference between now and then is that at that time, debt to income ratios were increasing because the income that we were using to guarantee to back the loans was falling, right? We were doing worse loans, so the debt to income ratio is going up. This time, it's because mortgage rates are higher. So the people who are borrowing are actually stronger, but because the rates are up so far and home prices have been up over the last 15 years, that's why the debt to income ratio is at the new loans is higher right now.
So, do you feel like that nuance of understanding that makes a difference as far as like how risky those loans are, or what the
I think
default
it
risk
absolutely
is?
does, right? Because if you just look at debt to income ratio on those on loans, like it's scary high. It's higher than it was in 2006, right? And so should we be panicking about that like we should have been in 2006? But so in some ways it is scary for the American consumer, right? This is obviously why home sales are low. On the other hand, this debt to income ratio has climbed over the last 2 years because mortgage rates have climbed over the last 2 years. So if in the second half of the year, if we get lucky and rates fall, then that debt to income ratio falls, right? It corrects itself. If we don't get lucky, then you can understand why sales will stay low, because like it is a very easy indicator of unaffordability.
It sure is. So some of that HMDA data, though, I think one of the surprising things that you and I were talking before this podcast about was the percentage of buyers, the first-time home buyers. So tell us about that in this environment where it would seem very, very difficult for them.
Yes. So the percentage of buyers who are first-time home buyers is now 53% of those new mortgages in the first quarter, or that's actually towards the end of last year when that's measured from. 53% of those. That's up from the first quarter of 22, which is like 49%. And during the pandemic boom time, the percentage of first-time home buyers declined basically every quarter during those 2 full years of 2020, 21 into 2022. As mortgage rates were falling dramatically, that spurred a bunch of other buyers. It spurred investors, it spurred second home buyers, it spurred a bunch of transactions. And then as money got more expensive, you can see a shift towards the people who are like, it's a life event time to buy, rather than it's an optional time to buy an investment property, because fewer investment properties pencil out now. And so you see a little bit of a shift there. So it's really fascinating. I think that one of the offshoots of ultra low rates is that proportionally fewer first-time homebuyers can compete.
Interesting.
And so, we can see that first-time homebuyers are rising now as rates are more expensive. And there are probably other things that are factors in there, like there are like incentive programs, government programs, rebates and taxes and things like that are geared for first-time home buyers. And so maybe they get to take advantage of those things. Like there are those types of factors going into play here, but relatively more. So even though it's more expensive for a first-time home buyer, a young family buying their first home, it is relatively less competition.
So, you know what? I think that these kind of insights from the data are really fascinating because they go against like what you would think normally, or maybe sometimes what we see in the mainstream press, right? When they try to write about housing, they're coming into it with the preconceptions that other people would if you're a consumer. So for instance, to think that first-time homebuyers have a harder time when mortgage rates are low, and that's because there's so much more competition and so many more people who can come in with a better offer, and they're not going to get priced out. That is so counterintuitive to kind of what you would normally think.
Yeah. But if you go back and think about like how competitive it was and how frustrating it was for then it makes sense that, when you think about how it might be easier for a first time home buyer now, and easier is a relative term, right? It's obviously more expensive, and that is no fun, but less competition there.
In the vein of things that may not seem obvious, I have to bring up the mortgage rate lockdown idea because, of course, we talk about it a lot. I know that you are somebody who looks at the data and says, this is what it actually means when we have higher rates, and you would not term it a lockdown. So maybe just spend a minute or two bringing our audience up to date on that.
Yeah, so I believe the way I've described it is not that we don't have a lockdown. It's that the conventional wisdom on the mortgage rate lockdown is that mortgage rates are high so that I'm never going to sell my house now and I'm locked in. But I believe that it is a decade of low rates that create the lockdown, not the high rates now. In other words, if rates fall for now, let's say they fall back to 3%, I'm still not selling my first house. And so I am locked in from a decade of low rates and not from the high rates now. I am, we will see if rates fall, you'll see, more transactions happening. Demand picks up for sure. But if rates fall, then demand picks up more than supply. And so then you get falling inventory and rising prices in those conditions. And so I believe that when we look at how do you solve the lock-in problem, the lock-in problem is that we have so many people who have such a great deal on their mortgages that they never want to give them up. And so the way we get out of that is by multiple years of higher mortgage rates. So we start off talking about how many people have rates under 4% and how many under 5% and how many under 6% on their mortgage. And each month, those expensive mortgages grow. Those people are not locked in because they have expensive mortgages. And so over time, that's how we solve the lockdown problem or lock-in problem. And lock-in happens in all kinds of other ways too, like, in states like California who have ultra low property taxes locked in forever.
Right.
Now, that prevents me from selling too. It's not the high price now, it's the low price that I have. It's the great deal that I have that prevents me from selling, that locks me in. And so, multiple years of higher rates is what gets us back to greater inventory, that gets us back to a less competitive buyer market, that gets us back to less home price appreciation each year, a more stable market. All of those things are a result of higher rates for longer, even though that prospect has other things that are very scary too, right? Because home sales are really low. And, the transaction volume is really low now because it's expensive. So that's what we see.
Well, let's talk about inventory because, you are the guru of inventory because Altos Research has insight and data on all of the major markets across the nation at a very local level. You track it weekly. That's what we base our weekly tracker on. That's what you do your video on. That's what's drives a lot of our news coverage. So let's talk about inventory and where we are. Especially, let's compare us. Let's start by comparing us to last year.
So inventory is 38% more homes unsold on the market now than last year at this time. It is growing. Inventory is growing in every state. So every state in the country has more homes on the market now than a year ago. Some states a lot more. Florida and Texas and some of the Sun Belt states have a lot more homes on the market now, which may be 60 or 70%. I can think Phoenix, Arizona off the top of my head is about, I think, 74% more homes on the market now than a year ago. Right, those are significant changes. And some states like New York has got like 6% more, but there's more, right? There's more in every state. And we can see that there are 5 states that have more homes unsold on the market now than in 2019 pre-pandemic.
Wow. So, okay, which are those 5 states?
So that's Texas and Florida, and then also Oklahoma and Arkansas and Idaho. So Texas, Florida, and Idaho were really, boomtown markets during the pandemic. Oklahoma and Arkansas also, they have some of that Sun Belt migration, but also have a slowing demand. And one of the reasons they have slowing demand is because in some of those markets, they have like lower FICO scores for borrowers. So mortgages are more expensive in a place like Arkansas than they are in upstate New York.
So interesting. It's one of those things that you're like, what? Okay,
Yeah.
so when we look at Texas and Florida, right? We've talked about this. I think about 6 weeks ago, we wrote a story about that 40% of the inventory, that those 2 states account for 40% of the inventory. Do I have that right?
Something like that. Yeah, like the inventory increase. So was surging in those markets, and Texas and Florida are the 2 biggest inventory states. California is third. And California has less inventory even though a lot more people than those 2 states, because of California's property tax lock-in. So California has a chronic shortage of homes for sale per capita that compared to Texas and Florida. So Texas has high property taxes and therefore has a much more robust home sales market. You're less likely to hoard real estate in Texas.
So when you look at, so we've heard all sorts of things about like coastal Florida, especially, right? If you're zeroing in on condos in coastal Florida, are there any of those pockets that you're like, this is worth keeping an eye on because of the number of homes coming on the market for sale?
Yeah. So South and West Florida this year has really been the slowest parts of the country. And those are, that's like from Naples and Sarasota up through Punta Gorda has been maybe the slowest market for a while, through Tampa, so all of the Gulf Coast, Florida. There are more homes on the market, and there are some more new listings. But it's really a demand slowdown and a supply increase there, as opposed to just a giant flood of sellers. There are more sellers because of costs, and the costs in Florida are really insurance costs, taxes that are catching up with where they should be, and so it can be dramatically more expensive for insurance in coastal Florida than it was 4 years ago. Even though you've got a 2% mortgage, your insurance has gone from $500 a month to $1,500 a month. And now suddenly for a second home that you use 3 weeks a year, suddenly it doesn't feel as strong. It doesn't pencil out as much. And so some of those are coming back on the market.
Does that worry you when you look at those numbers, or do you feel like there's a natural wave there that will take care of itself? I think the thing for me is the insurance variable is so different than the other things that we're used to thinking about that I'm like I don't know how to think about those markets when it's like is this going to be a problem? Is this a potential crash coming because of the insurance?
Yeah, it seems to me that there is enough dynamism, like enough cash, enough uh, in the U.S. real estate market as a whole, that we are unlikely to see a crash. We can see prices adjusting in local markets, down, and so like prices dropping 10% in Southwest Florida is it sucks if you bought in July of 22,
Right.
but for most people there, it's like, okay, like it's an up and down of the market. And while it's never fun, it's also not catastrophic. It seems to me like we have those types of things going on. In fact, it's probably healthy for long-term affordability in Florida, where you compare that to California. So California also has a really restricted insurance market. So, wildfire risk in so much of California, and because California has a really restricted insurance market, even though it's expensive to insure a house in California, it's probably not as expensive as it should be in a lot of places. And therefore, there's another reason that California has ultra low property taxes locked in forever, and artificially capped insurance costs, and therefore it's cheaper to hold on to the house than it should be, and therefore there's fewer on the market, and therefore there's more upward price pressure, and all of those elements come to play.
Lots of variables there. Very interesting. Okay, let's talk about home prices generally. Let's pull out a little bit, and look at it nationally because, you and I have talked about this before. People thought more home price, we'd have more moderation there than we have had. So where are we currently?
So currently, across the country, homes are the median price of all the homes on the market right now is $450,000. That is exactly where it was last year at this time. And in fact, it is a fraction below where it was in 22 at this time. So this is the asking price. If you walk into the market and you look around, like the median price is $450,000. The price where people are buying, the price of the newly pending homes each week is just under $400,000, like $399,000. And that is about 3% higher than last year. So just 3.5% higher than last year at this time. And so, what we do is we're tracking the pendings, the homes that are in contract each week. And what we could see is like that this is a proxy for those that are going to sell, right? These are the ones that are going into contract. They spend 30 or 45 days in contract before the deal closes. So what you can see is the headlines that will be reported for home sales prices in August and September are about 3%, 3.5% more than they were a year ago. Because we can see inventory climbing, and because we have things like we can measure demand slowing and staying low, we can. I envision that in the second half of the year, that 3% gain will compress a little bit, 2%, 1%, 0, like to end the year in this 0 to 3% home price appreciation range. If you look at like the headline numbers, like the Case-Shiller and some things like that, are still reporting 5.5 or 6% home price gains. That's a little bit lagging. That's from earlier in the year. And so we expect that those will start reporting slightly compressed as the year goes on.
So one of the other things you track is the percentage of homes that took a price cut before they sold. So it was listed at this price, and when it sold, it had to take a price cut. And there's, we have to think about the context in that, because that doesn't always mean, oh, things are terrible if it rises, or things are great if it falls. Give us a little bit of nuance there and what you're seeing.
Yeah, the way to think about price reductions is, as a rule of thumb nationally, about a third of homes take a price cut before they sell. Sometimes that's accidental and sometimes it's intentional, but about a third take a price cut. And so when a market is cooler, it might be 40, 35, 40% are taking price cuts. A third thought they were overpriced, but some of those didn't get their offers. And so more people need to take price cuts. On the other hand, when a market's hotter, maybe, a third think they're overpriced, but some of them do get their offers. So only 25% do a price cut, or 20%. And when the market was super hot with ultra cheap money, we're buying everything in sight, it was nationally only 15% of homes were taking price cuts, right? It was a real obvious trend. And so right now we're at 38.5% of the market of the country. So of the homes on the market, nearly 40% have taken a price cut. That's higher than normal, right? That's indicative of weak demand. It is also been climbing, but not climbing super dramatically. So price cuts always rise in the second half of the year. You get closer to the end of the summer. If your house is still on the market, you do a price cut. You get to the holidays, you're like, oh, if we're going to sell this thing, we got to do one more discount. So you get a normal cycle. In the spring, you get fresh inventory, and so the curve comes down again. So you get this normal cycle of price cuts for the year. At the end of 22, we had 10 months of rising mortgage rates and the brakes putting on the market real hard in 22. So we finished 2022 with 43% of the market with price cuts. Mm-hmm. And that was in like November 22. And what that told us was, really dramatically, so went from 15% to 43% in a year. So a bunch of price cuts happening. And then we had year over year home sales price declines in the first quarter of the following year. So the price cuts, the active market, is a leading indicator of future sales prices. And so what it's telling us right now is there's more price cuts than normal. It's rising a little bit. It's not rising super fast. So it is not indicating prices falling across the country. It is not in the data, but there's nothing that there's no price appreciation in the data either, right? It is flat at best. And, you look back over the last multi-decades, and it's totally common for home prices to climb, 5 or 6% and 7% in a year. And so, if we're coming in at 3%, that is a low year for the housing market.
That's great context. That's crazy. I also think, even though, I can't imagine you're watching this daily, maybe, by the minute, I don't know. I pay pretty close attention. I think your normal consumer, though, they're not paying attention. So I think some of those price cuts are probably they still have unrealistic expectations of like what their neighbors sold for in XYZ, or, oh, isn't it still really hot, or whatever. Like, I think there's still that sort of unrealistic expectation going on.
Yes. There always is. And some of the unrealistic expectation is a seller who thinks they're going to get too much for their house. They still want to get, they're in Austin, Texas, and you still want to get your July 22 price. But, right. But on the other hand, there are buyers who are waiting because they think the market's crashing. And so their unrealistic expectations are that, who could buy, mortgage rates are 7%, home prices are crashing. And there are people who tell me every day that home prices are crashing. And I'm like, not yet. Like, maybe there are a couple of markets where home prices are lower over last year, over 2 years. Definitely a handful of those around the country. Most of the country has still pretty restricted inventory. Only, like I said, only 5 states have, more inventory than they did in 2019. Everybody else is still fewer. Most of the country, you have rising home prices this year. Like it's demand is weak everywhere. Supply is increasing everywhere, but there's no real sign of a flood of inventory, no panicky sellers. And so if you're a buyer who's waiting on the sidelines for like some crash, like there's no signal in the data of a crash anywhere. And so how long are you going to wait? And maybe you're going to wait a long time, but then I think about like what creates a real crash, what kind of economic catastrophe do we have to go through to create a real crash? And then if you're waiting, do you want to buy then? Like, I don't know. So those are so there are unrealistic expectations, which we try to help solve with the data.
And you absolutely do. I love it. This has been a really interesting conversation as always, Mike. Thank you so much for being on.
Always a pleasure, Sarah.
Listeners, I would tell you if you want to find out more, Mike does a weekly recap on Mondays. We publish that on HousingWire.com. He also has his video in there. Go look that up. Of course, you can also go to AltosResearch.com. Mike, thank you again.